The fire crackled with the savage rhythm of drums, loud, primitive, and merciless beneath a sky gone copper with dusk. Smoke rose like a serpent from the pit, curling toward the stars as if in prayer or hunger. Beneath that smoke, chained to a sharpened wooden stake driven deep into the scorched black soil, a girl, no, something like a girl, twitched as the heat licked her skin. Her alien body was slender, shaped like a child's, but with fur patterned in moonlit silver and violet. Stripes now darkened with soot and blood. Her forefingers clenched in pain, and her throat dry and hoarse, could no longer scream. She didn't understand what these creatures wanted from her. She didn't speak their tongue. All she had done was stumble from the wreckage of her mother's ship, dazed and coughing, only to be seized, stripped, and tied up like a beast meant to feed a god. The tribal aliens danced around her, their eyes shining with ritualistic madness, their bodies painted in mud and bone ash, their sharp teeth flashing each time one leapt and screeched toward the flames. The girl could feel her vision fading as pain exploded again from her back, where the fire had started to blister her striped fur, then her skin. She couldn't cry anymore. She had stopped pleading an hour ago. Now all she could do was look skyward and wonder why. Why the galaxy, vast and full of sentient life, had no place for someone like her. Why no one had come for her. Why pain always came first and mercy never did. But then, the drumming stopped. It was not a gradual stop. It was like the world inhaled and forgot to exhale. Like the storm itself looked up and shivered. The tribal aliens turned, slow and stiff, toward the edge of the firelight where the jungle grew thick and tangled, where the darkness had eyes. A sound broke the silence, not a howl or a roar, but something worse, a footstep. Then another, steady, heavy, unapologetic, a rhythm not of dance, but of death or judgment. And out of that jungle stepped a creature taller than any of them, bipedal, clothed in dark material. Its face covered by a smooth black visor reflected the fire. Its hands were open, empty, no blade, no gun, just skin. It was a human. He didn't speak when he came forward, didn't raise his voice or bare his teeth like they had. He simply walked slowly, calmly toward the fire, past the circle of shocked tribal warriors frozen in confusion. They did not move. They only watched, as if the air itself had grown too thick to breathe. The human stopped just feet from the pit, looked down at the small burned creature trembling at the stake, and something in his chest twisted like a knife being turned. He had seen many things in this galaxy: pirates, slavers, beasts that war, the skins of saints, but this was new, a child. Alien, yes, but innocent, tortured not by war, but by ignorance, by ritual, by madness. His fists clenched, not in rage, but in grief. The girl looked up, delirious and barely conscious. Her vision swam, but she saw the shadow move closer. She braced herself for another pain, another strike, another cruel game. But then, impossibly, there was water. Cold, beautiful, holy water. The human had pulled a flask from his belt, twisted it open, and poured it over her back. She gasped, not from pain, but from shock. The steam hissed as the flames were smothered. And then his hands, gloved and rough, reached out and broke the rope around her arms in one clean snap. He didn't speak. He didn't ask. He just lifted her from the fire as if she weighed nothing. She had never been held like that, not since her mother died screaming in the ship that fell through the stars. The tribesmen began to stir, whispers growing into low growls. The human turned his head slowly, eyes behind the visor scanning them like prey. His voice was soft when it came, but it broke like thunder. "Don't." That was all he said. But somehow, that was enough. None of them dared move as he stepped back from the fire, the girl in his arms. She shivered against him, not just from pain, but from confusion. Why had he come? Why him, of all things? He was supposed to be the monster. The destroyer species? The one everyone warned you about in hushed tones humans were dangerous. But the way he held her, it didn't feel like danger. It felt like a dream trying to wake her. He walked into the dark, carrying her away from the fire. The jungle swallowed them whole, and behind them, the flames kept burning, but now with no victim, no sacrifice. Only silence and fear. The fear was theirs. Asterisk, the jungle had no roads, no maps, only roots like veins of the earth and leaves that whispered when touched. He walked slowly, each step firm but careful, like he was carrying the last flame in a dying world. In his arms, the alien girl clung weakly to the front of his chest plate, her body limp, her fur still steaming from the extinguished fire. She didn't speak, and he didn't ask her to. Her wounds ran deep, some visible, some buried beneath. Layers of terror that language could never reach. But he held her close, shielding her from the cool night air and the echo of that awful fire behind them. His armor was battered, scratched from 100 old skirmishes, but right now it was her shelter. And somehow, despite the trauma, she didn't fight his touch. She didn't squirm away, because in the middle of the fear and silence, this creature, this human, had done something no one else had. He stopped the burning. He found a place beneath, a broken canopy where moonlight spilled through the leaves like milk. It was quiet here, too far for the drums, too wild for hunters. Gently, he set her down on a mossy patch beside a fallen log, then knelt before her, slow and patient, like a man approaching a wounded bird. His visor hissed softly as it opened, revealing a weathered face with lines carved from years not old, but marked. His eyes were human eyes, but they did not hold the sharpness she expected. They held pain and gentleness. A gentleness that didn't fit the stories her kind had once told around the Starforge. He reached into a satchel on his side, pulled out a small medkit, and opened it with calloused fingers. The tools were simple spray foam for burns, knitted bandages, a salve that smelled of crushed herbs and earth. He didn't speak as he worked, only nodded to himself when she whimpered, only paused when she flinched, waiting for her to let him continue. Her breaths were short, shallow, her eyes wide as he dabbed the burns on her side with the cool salve. It stung, and she gritted her teeth, but she did not pull away. The human glanced up once, just to see if she would meet his gaze. And for one fragile second, she did. It was like watching a glass window crack, but not shatter. She blinked. He nodded Dot when he finished tending her wounds. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand to know what planet she came from or what species she was. Instead, he pulled off his jacket, thick and warm, lined with heat fibers, and draped it around her tiny body. She had never worn anything so heavy or soft. It still smelled like metal and smoke, but it was dry and safe. The warmth seeped into her shivering bones. And again, she watched him, puzzled. Why would he do this? He sat beside her now, resting, with his back to the log, head tilted to the stars. There was no urgency in him, no panic, no desire to leave. It was as though he had all the time in the universe to sit in this forgotten corner of jungle beside a girl from another world who barely had breath left. After a while, he spoke, not loudly, not to command, but to offer. "Name's Wyatt," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel with a little honey at the edge. "I don't know if you can understand me, kid, but I saw what they were doing. Back there, I've seen a lot in this galaxy, but not that. Not like that." He ran a hand over his face, sighed through his nose. "Nobody deserves to go out like that, not even a stranger." The girl didn't respond, but she watched his mouth. Something about the rhythm of his words calmed the tremble in her fingers. He pulled something from his pack again, a ration bar, wrapped in silver foil. It was nothing special, just protein and compressed fruit. But when he peeled it open and held it toward her, she hesitated. Then slowly she reached out, her burned hand trembling. He let her take it, and she brought it to her mouth like a starving animal that still expected poison. One bite, then two. Her breathing steadied. She didn't smile, not yet. But the bar disappeared in moments, and her eyes lost a little of their panic. Wyatt didn't smile either. But his eyes softened. The fire back in the village was still burning, no doubt, and they would notice she was gone soon. They might even come looking, but for now she was alive. For now, the girl was wrapped in a human's jacket, belly half full, heart beginning to beat like it might not stop. He looked over at her again. "We'll rest here tonight. You're safe now, right?" His voice was low, a little hoarse, like it had forgotten how to be kind but was trying anyway. The girl didn't know what the words meant, but she understood the tone, and for the first time since the crash, since the capture, since the fire, she closed her eyes, not in fear, but to sleep. The night was thick with the hum of unseen life-soft wings brushing leaves, distant howls from creatures too tired to hunt, and the slow, heavy rhythm of rain that began to patter against the leaves above. Wyatt remained awake. He always did, when others needed rest. Sitting cross-legged near the base of the log, one hand resting on his pulse rifle and the other on his thigh, he listened to the storm above and the quiet breathing beside him. The girl had curled into the folds of his jacket like a wounded animal, hidden deep inside a cocoon that was never meant to exist in this wild place. Every so often she whimpered, not from fear, but from memory. Whatever they had done to her had etched scars far beneath skin. He had seen soldiers break under less, but this child alien or not still held something inside her that hadn't shattered, that strength. It reminded him of someone Dot when morning came. It came slow and gray, misclung to everything like ghosts. Wyatt stirred, stiff and aching, from keeping vigil, and glanced at her. She hadn't moved. Still breathing, still warm. Carefully, he reached for the medkit again and crouched beside her. Her eyes fluttered open as he pulled back the jacket to check her wounds. She stared at him, still and unsure, her gaze locked on his face. There was no language between them, only presence. But something was changing. Slowly, quietly, something was building, not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The question in her eyes wasn't, "Will you hurt me?" anymore. It was, "Why haven't you?" As he applied more salve, she didn't flinch this time. Her eyes stayed on his. She even leaned in a little closer, drawn not by fear, but by warmth. Then suddenly she did something small, something that made his heart skip like a misfired engine. She reached out and touched his face. Her hand, fingers wrapped in faded bandages, brushed the edge of his cheek, tracing the scar. There, it wasn't curiosity. It was connection. Like she was asking who he was, not what species, not what weapon he carried, but what pain he'd seen. Wyatt didn't pull away. Instead, he let her touch linger, his eyes holding hers, and in that moment, the gulf between worlds seemed a little smaller. "I got that one on Varus 3, he said, voice low and far away. "Tried to stop a slaver from taking a family. Lost the fight. Barely lived." He paused. Didn't think it mattered anymore, but maybe it does. The girl tilted her head, not understanding the words, but she sat up straighter. Her body still trembled with the memory of flames, but now her spine held a little strength. And then she did something else. She made a sound. Just a soft syllable, a warbled word from a language ancient and melodic, like the sigh of wind through crystal. It had no translation, but he knew what it meant. She was trying. Wyatt smiled, the first real smile in weeks, maybe months. "You're A tough one, he murmured. Stronger than I ever was. He reached into his bag and pulled out a broken datapad, one of the old ones with pictographic interface. He tapped it a few times until it hummed weakly to life and offered it to her. Here, show me. Tell me who you are. Her eyes lit up, not bright, but flickering like the first ember of fire that hasn't yet caught. She took the pad with trembling hands, studied it, then slowly began to draw. Not words. Not maps, but shapes. She drew her starship, split down. The middle, trailing fire. She drew the jungle, the fire pit, the circle of teeth, and then she drew him. A towering figure wrapped in black, lifting her from the flames. The drawing was crude, childlike, but it was enough. Wyatt stared at it and felt a sharp ache in his chest. Not sadness. Not pity, but something deeper, something like purpose. He looked back at her and without asking, gently tapped the drawing. Of her ship. You were running, he said. But from what? The girl's fingers moved again. This time she drew something else, black ships with sharp wings and red symbols, descending on a world. Her world. She drew explosions, flames. People heard people running, screaming. The ships didn't belong to the tribe. They belonged to something else, something organized, something cruel. Wyatt's heart sank. She wasn't just a stray. She was a refugee. He looked at her again, this time not as a broken thing, but as a survivor, a witness, a warning. We need to get off this moon, he whispered, more to himself than her. And I need to get you somewhere safe. But as he said it, the jungle hissed, a bird didn't sing, a leaf didn't fall, and the silence meant someone was watching. Wyatt's hand moved to his rifle. He didn't speak. The girl pressed close to him again, her eyes wide. Their bond was now. Longer, delicate dot, it was necessary. Asterisk, the silence before danger was never empty. It was always too full. Wyatt could feel it pressing in from every direction, a stillness so heavy it made his ears ring. His instincts, carved from years of crawling through war zones and surviving ambush, told him what the forest refused to say. They were not alone anymore. The girl curled beneath his jacket, once more tensed against his leg, her body suddenly rigid as a wire. Her wide, luminous eyes scanned the canopy above, the branches, the mist. Somewhere beyond the brush, boots or claws, or something worse. Moved just enough to disturb the earth, but not enough to be seen. Wyatt raised his rifle slowly, one hand gently shielding the girl. He didn't fire. Not yet. He waited. Then a sound, a whisper in a language he hadn't heard in years snaked through the jungle like poison smoke. It came from the north, and then the same word again from the west, the east, the south. That they were surrounded. He rose, lifting the girl with one arm, cradling her against his chest. Her heart beat so fast it felt like it might vanish in her fear. I know, he whispered. I hear them too. From the trees stepped figures, tall and armored in black glass and bone-white plating, weapons sleek and silent in their hands. These were not the tribal fire worshippers. These were soldiers. Not local. Not feral. Trained. Their eyes glowed a dull red behind face masks shaped like insect mandibles, and their movements were coordinated and humanly calm. Wyatt knew the kind. They weren't hunting for a meal, Dot. They were collecting something or someone. Voice buzzed from the lead soldier's mask, distorted through translation tech. You have something that belongs to us. Wyatt didn't flinch. She's not a thing. The soldier tilted his head slightly. She's an asset. Biogenetic. Priority class A, her species carries rare immunosequences. Our employers require her. You are not authorized to interfere. The girl whimpered softly, her small fingers digging into Wyatt's sleeve. She knew them. She remembered the ships, the screams, the fire not from rituals, but from missiles. These were the ones who came to her world, who tore her people from their homes, from their sky, who called them assets and specimens. Her lips parted, and in a shaky breath, she uttered one word, just one, Dravari. Wyatt's blood ran cold. The Dravari weren't soldiers. They were contractors, genetic harvesters, black market. Enforcers, mercenaries paid to find rare species and extract what made them special cells, marrow, organs, piece by piece. Quietly, efficiently. Your file says you're former Terran infantry, the soldier continued. You know how this ends. Step aside. You don't need to die for it. Wyatt slowly lowered the girl to the ground behind him, then stood tall. I'm not dying today, he said calmly, but I'll make sure you do. The soldier didn't hesitate. His rifle came up like lightning, but Wyatt had already moved. Years of muscle memory kicked in like fire through his veins. He rolled, fired once, striking the soldier in the visor. The head snapped back, a sizzle of blue sparks, and the body dropped. The jungle erupted. Gunfire hissed through the trees like angry insects. Wyatt dove, grabbing the girl and sprinting toward a ravine, bullets carving bark and soil around him. The Dravari followed, coordinated and cold. But Wyatt knew this terrain better than they did. He was trained for chaos. They were trained for control. And this place had no rules. He ducked behind a stone outcropping, breathing hard, his jacket torn, his shoulder grazed. The girl huddled behind him, shaking, but her eyes burned with something more than fear now. Rage, not the kind that led to violence, but to memory. She grabbed the datapad again and drew fast, almost feverishly. Wyatt glanced at it between shots and saw what she had drawn. A ship dot, not just any ship, a beacon dot coordinates, an old distress signal. Is that yours? He asked, firing blind to keep the mercenaries pinned. She nodded rapidly. A chance. A long one, but maybe. Wyatt slung his rifle and lifted her again. All right, he growled. Then we get to that ship, and we burn their contract to ash. As they ran through mud and root, the truth hit him with full weight. She was never a lost child. She was hunted. And this wasn't about kindness anymore. This was war. They ran. Branches clawed at their faces, roots tried to trip them, and behind them, death chased without mercy. Wyatt's legs pumped with the desperation of someone who had nothing left to lose and one thing left to protect. The girl clung to him, not with fear this time, but with purpose. Her small hands gripped his neck tightly, and her cheek pressed against the side of his face as if she were trying to merge into his skin, to disappear into him where the world could not reach. Her and Wyatt, through the searing burn in his lungs and the blood dripping from his shoulder, swore to every star in the sky that she would not be taken. Not while he was still breathing. They broke through the jungle and into a clearing that had been claimed by a ruin, a place where ancient stone met shattered metal. In the center, half sunk into the earth and wrapped in vines, sat the carcass of a ship. Her ship, that was cracked open like an egg dropped from orbit, its hull twisted and scorched, but the beacon still blinked faintly in the nose cone. One red pulse, slow, weak, alive. The girl saw it and cried out, a sound that rose not from her throat but from her soul. She tried to scramble out of Wyatt's arms, pointing toward it with trembling fingers. Her voice warbled with urgent syllables. He didn't know, but he understood the meaning clear as day. That's home. Wyatt nodded, breathless. We're almost there. Stay with me. But the jungle was not done bleeding. A sharp hiss split the air, and something metallic slammed into his back. He spun, shielding her with his body as he hit the ground hard, the air knocked clean from his chest. A shadow loomed. One of the Dravari, taller than the rest, with silver insignia etched into his armor, stepped forward from the trees. a sleek shock spear in hand and 3 others flanking him. The girl screamed. The soldier said nothing. He only raised the spear and pointed it at Wyatt's chest. "You were warned," came the distorted voice. Wyatt pushed himself up, arms shaking. His rifle was gone, thrown somewhere in the fall. His hand reached for his sidearm, but he knew it was hopeless. 4 against 1, no cover, no time. He looked at the girl, still clinging to his side, and saw something in her eyes that made his throat tighten. She wasn't afraid of dying anymore. She was afraid he would. Wyatt stood. No weapon drawn, no rage in his face. Just resolve, like iron cold in sorrow. "I'm not giving her to you," he said simply. "She does not belong to you," the lead mercenary replied. "She doesn't belong to anyone." There was a moment of stillness, the kind that stretches like wire over the neck of a violin. And then crack the spear fired, a beam of energy lancing straight at Wyatt, but it never reached him. The girl had moved, faster than thought. She threw herself in front of him, her small frame absorbing the impact meant for his heart. The shockwave knocked them both down. Wyatt caught her before she hit the ground, screaming her name even though he had never known it. Her body spasmed. In his arms, tiny limbs twitching, eyes rolled back. No, damn it, no. He choked, cradling her close. Her fur was smoking where the blast had struck her ribs. She coughed weakly, blood in the corner of her mouth. Her eyes fluttered. The Dravari leader lowered his spear. She was not to be harmed, he muttered with mechanical disgust. "Retrieve the sample," Wyatt snapped. He didn't think. He didn't plan. He moved. One hand on his knife, the other grabbing the broken end of a rusted metal beam near the wreckage. He rose like death made flesh and threw the jagged steel into the chest of the nearest mercenary. Before the others could turn, he was on them, slashing, dodging, roaring, not like a soldier. Like a man who had just lost the last good thing in a cruel galaxy. He didn't win. Not fully, but he bought time. The fight was messy, brutal. When it ended, Wyatt was on one knee, bleeding from a dozen places, breathing like he'd swallowed fire. The mercenaries lay scattered, 2 dead, 1 unconscious, the leader limping and crawling back toward the jungle. Wyatt didn't chase him. He turned, back to her. The girl wasn't moving. He fell beside her and pulled her into his lap. Her breath was shallow. Too shallow. "No, kid. Please, stay with me. You did good. You were so brave." Her eyes fluttered open. "Just barely." She looked at him, smiled, and then her hand weakly pointed to the ship. The beacon, hope, was shaking. Arms, Wyatt carried her toward the wreckage. Smoke curled from the cracks, but the signal pulsed faster now. He slammed his fist into the panel beside the door, bypassing the lock with old Earth Marine codes. The emergency lights flared on. The interior groaned, but the system still worked. He found the medbay. It had 1 working stasis pod. He laid her inside. As the glass sealed over her tiny form and the machine hummed to life, freezing her wounds and suspending her body in healing. Time, he collapsed beside it, fingers trembling, body breaking, but heart still, burning. She wasn't gone, not yet, but she had given everything for him. Now he had to give everything for her. Asterisk time inside a dying ship was different. It ticked like a countdown, not a clock. Wyatt sat in the dim glow of the medbay, his hand pressed to the glass of the stasis pod. She lay still inside, eyes closed, breath frozen mid-inhale, suspended between death and healing. The hiss of oxygen, the slow pulse of vital monitors, and the cracked hum of a failing generator were the only sounds left. He had done all he could. The machine would keep her alive, maybe, but the jungle outside had grown loud again, and the Dravari weren't finished. The door shuddered. Then again, this time harder. He stood slowly, his wounds wrapped in scavenged bandages, pain radiating from every joint. The pulse rifle he'd recovered from one of the fallen mercenaries rested against his back. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He'd stopped being one years ago. But the man who now stepped away from that pod toward the ship's entry bay felt like war. The outer door exploded inward in a flash of red. Smoke rushed in. Silhouettes followed, 6 of them this time, armored fully, the leader front and center, still limping from the earlier fight. His helmet cracked, revealing part of a human-like jaw twisted with anger. "Your interference ends." "Here, Turin," the leader spat. Wyatt didn't flinch. "She's under my protection. She is property of the HFY cartel." Wyatt stepped forward into the light. "So was my sister." That stopped them. Just for a beat, she was taken, he said quietly, by a team like yours, on a backwater moon. She was 12. They said she had something rare in her DNA, something that could help the rich stay young, stay strong. I found what was left of her 3 years later in a lab tank. I didn't stop them then. His eyes hardened. "But I'm stopping you now." The leader didn't give the order. He didn't need to. The squad moved. Wyatt fired first. The ship shook with the sound of violence, raw, close and desperate. Wyatt fought like a cornered animal, using the ship's twisted corridors as cover, knowing every ricochet, every splash of blood might be his last. He didn't fight for glory. He fought for the girl, for her breath, for the spark of kindness that had grown between them like a candle in a world made of storms. One by one, they fell, not clean, not quick. He took a plasma bolt to the side, fell to one knee, screamed through gritted teeth, and kept firing. Took another to the shoulder and drove a knife into the throat of the attacker with the last of his strength. The leader remained, both of them bloody, both staggering, both standing only because rage and purpose hadn't let them fall yet. Wyatt dropped his rifle. It was empty. Sparks flew from the barrel. The Dravari raised his blade long, curved, made for organ removal. Wyatt didn't run. He charged. They collided like meteors. Steel screamed. Bones cracked. Wyatt didn't think he remembered. He remembered his sister's laugh, the look in the alien girl's eyes when he first gave her water, the sound she made when she threw herself between him and death. All of it fueled him. The blade cut deep into his side, but he didn't fall. Instead, he headbutted the mercenary with everything he had. Once, twice, a third time. The helmet shattered. The man inside screamed. Wyatt grabbed the blade, twisted it, drove it back into the one who wielded it. Deep. Final. The mercenary's body crumpled like ash under a wave, and Wyatt collapsed beside it, blood pooling. Beneath him, the ship was quiet again. Lights flickered. He crawled inch by inch back to the medbay, back to her. Every breath was an avalanche. Every movement dragged pain through him like barbed wire. But he made it, just far enough to reach the pod. His fingers brushed the glass. Inside, her vitals pulsed strong now. Her healing had stabilized. She would live. He let his head rest against the pod. Let his eyes close, not in defeat. In peace, because this time he had saved her. And no one would ever take that from him. The stars came later, long after the screams had faded, after the blood had dried in rust-colored pools along the floor, after the smoke had drifted out into the broken jungle like the last breath of war. The jungle had gone quiet again, not with fear, but with respect. The air held a strange stillness now, as if even the wild knew something holy had happened inside that wrecked ship, something that did not belong to death. The girl opened her eyes in the stasis pod sometime before. Dawn, her breath slow but real, her pain distant like the memory of a storm long past. She blinked once, then twice, then saw the face pressed gently to the glass familiar, human and still, He hadn't left. He hadn't run. He hadn't let the fire take her. She pressed her hand to the inside of the glass, soft, confused, expecting him to move, to wake, but he didn't, not right away. His face was peaceful, carved with exhaustion and lined with blood and dirt, but there was no fear there. Only calm, as if in the last moment he had found something worth the hurt. Slowly, her hand curled into a fist. She tapped the glass, then again. Louder dot, and then he stirred. A cough. A groan. A twitch of fingers that clutched at the side of the pod, as if trying to remember what breathing felt like. She gasped, mouth opening wide in silent joy, tears forming where only pain had lived before. He opened his eyes, low and bleary, and stared at her like she was the sun after a long winter. His lips moved, cracked and dry. He didn't say her name because he still didn't know it. But the word he whispered was one he had used all his life, one that meant hope even in the mud of, or hey, kid. Her hand met his through the glass. The moment stretched like eternity folded into a breath. And then her ship hummed around them. The beacon, stabilized now, pulsed in perfect rhythm. Somewhere far above, a signal had finally broken. Through the static of the wilds, someone was listening. Someone was coming. He looked up toward the blinking light, and for the first time in years, Wyatt smiled without guilt behind it. "They'll take you somewhere safe," he said softly, barely above a whisper. "A place where people don't burn little girls to make gods." She shook her head slowly. Her fingers tapped against the glass again, insistent, pleading, but he only leaned his forehead gently against the pod, closing his eyes. "I can't." "Go," he said. Her face twisted in protest. "I'm not leaving you," he said quickly, as if the words hurt more than the wounds. "But if they find me on that ship, they'll think I'm another merc. You need to tell them who I was, what we did, why I came for you. Can you do that?" She hesitated, not because she didn't understand, but because she didn't want to. Then slowly she nodded. A soft beep sounded. The autodock confirmed a stabilization pulse. The ship was rebooting, preparing for evac. The jungle outside was still burning at the edges of dawn, but inside that ruined vessel, a new life was preparing to leave. Wyatt reached into his jacket and pulled out a single, battered patch, the Terran infantry insignia. Old, faded, almost forgotten. He slid it into a slot beside the pod's biometric scanner. "For proof," he said, voice hollow with emotion. "So they believe you." She looked down at it, touched it, then looked up at him again, her lips parting slowly. A sound escaped her throat, soft, musical, a name. Why, yet? He choked. That was the first time she'd spoken his name, and he knew it would be the last time he ever needed to hear anything. The pod hissed, sealed. The ship lit up blue, and minutes later, just as the sun began to bleed gold through the treetops, the wreckage that had once been her tomb rose on newly ignited thrusters, cutting through the canopy and into the sky like a phoenix made of iron and memory. Wyatt stood beneath the drifting embers and watched it disappear into the light. One hand over his ribs, the other still wet with her tears. He would not go with her. That part of the story wasn't his to write, but he had given her the chance, and that was enough. The jungle grew quiet once more, but somewhere in a distant system, an alien child would speak his name, and the stars would remember the man who pulled her from the fire.